All right, today we're in section 11.3, the Pythagorean Theorem, on page 546. The first thing you need to know, some terms, and of course the formula. The formula is probably the most important part, but in order to understand the formula, you have to understand the terms. Okay, so the hypotenuse, you're going to write down everything that's on this screen. The hypotenuse is the side opposite the right angle. Okay, so this is what we call the hypotenuse. Hypotenuse. It's the side opposite the right angle. It's important that you don't get this side confused with any other sides. In the formula, it is represented by the variable c. Okay, the variable c is the variable that we use to represent the hypotenuse. Then, the two sides that form the right angle are our legs. We use the variable a to represent the vertical leg because it's the height or the altitude of the triangle. Okay, so a for altitude. And then leg b, what do you think b is going to stand for? B for base. B for base of the triangle. All right, so you need to know that the legs form the right angle. A is the altitude, the leg that's the altitude, and B is the base. And then C is the hypotenuse, which is opposite the right angle. All right, so make sure you write down everything on this slide. All right, so let's see how this looks in an example. It says a TV screen is rectangular and is measured by the length of a diagonal. The screen is 15 by 20. What is the length of the diagonal? All right, so we're going to set the values at 15, 20, and I don't know the diagonal. And remember that I use the variable c to represent the hypotenuse. All right, so we always start with our formula. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. All right, this is always our starting point. And now we're going to plug in the numbers where they belong in the formula. So according to the original sketch that you just drew of the outline in our terms, which one of these numbers is my a value? Which one? Just tell me. 15. It's going to be 15 because that's the altitude or the height of the triangle. Okay, so I'm going to plug in 15 for A, 15 squared. I'm going to plug in what for B? 20 squared, and I don't know C squared. And now I need to evaluate my exponents before I can add. So I need to figure out what is 15 squared plus 20 squared. I want you to go ahead and figure that out on your calculators and write your new total underneath. 625. 625 is going to be my total, and that equals c squared. Well, the other day we talked about how we can get a variable by itself when it's squared, when it has that exponent attached to it. So if a variable is squared, what is the opposite of squaring something? It is taking the square root. Taking the square root. So if c is squared and I need to get c by itself, I take the square root of c squared and I get just c. But whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So I take the square root of 625 and I get what? 25. Now, the question is it positive and negative or is it just one or the other? Here's the answer. Because I'm finding a measurement. Now, typically, like the other day when you solved equations, all of your answers were positive and negative. You guys remember that? Now here, the reason it's not is because you cannot have a negative measurement. Could you have a negative inch on your TV? Well, no. So with Pythagorean Theorem, there are no negative answers, so my answer is just 25. Just 25. C equals 25. Does that make sense? Yes, ma'am. Why? It's only positive. Okay? So C equals 25. All right, so now in the next example, okay, the only difference is I may not have an exact answer. I may have to round my answer to the nearest tenth. So now my hypotenuse is still what I'm solving for. So C is my unknown. and then I have 8 millimeters and 10 millimeters. I want you to go ahead and plug in these numbers into your formula and start solving, okay? So at least just try to get your substitutions. Okay, so what did you plug in for A?
8.
All right, so 8 squared plus, what did you plug in for B? 10 squared equals, and you don't know, C squared. So what is 8 squared plus 10 squared? 164 equals C squared. Now how do I solve for C? Since it's squared, what's the opposite of squaring something? Taking the square root. So I take the square root of C squared. Whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. Now here's the problem. When you take the square root of 164, it doesn't come out evenly. Change your answer to a decimal, and you're going to round to the nearest tenth. This is what you're going to do on your classwork today. It's what you'll do on your quiz and your test. So square root of 164 to the nearest tenth is what?
12.8.
Okay, so 12.8, and don't forget to approximate your answer. C is approximately 12.8. Now you can write it reverse and say C is approximately 12.8. That would be fine too. Okay? And that's going to be your answer. Approximate to the nearest tenth when it's not an even answer. Now what if I gave you these values? What if I said this is the right angle, this is 5 feet, this is 3 feet, and this is B. I want you to go ahead and try to plug in these numbers into the Pythagorean Theorem. Plug them in where they would go in your formula. Okay, so what did you plug in for A?
3 squared.
Okay, so 3 squared. What did you plug in for B?
Nothing.
Nothing. You don't know. So plus B squared. Now it's not nothing. That's your variable. That's what we're solving for is B. And then what did you plug in for C squared?
5 squared.
5 squared. Okay? So now I still need to evaluate my exponent. So what is 3 squared?
9.
Plus B squared equals what? 25. All right, now it's the process of how do I get B by itself? What is the first thing I need to do to get B by itself?
Subtract 9 on both sides.
Do you agree?
Yes.
Subtract 9 from both sides. Now I'm left with B squared equals 16. Well, is B by itself? Is that my answer?
No.
What do I need to do?
You need to find the square root.
Find the square root of both sides to get B by itself, and B equals 4 feet. 4 feet. Okay, B equals 4 feet. All right, so to find the leg length, guys, I start with my formula, plug in my numbers, but this time I had to move some numbers to the other side of the equation to solve for the variable. You're going to do this if you're solving for A or B. All right? If you understand that, that's everything you need to know for 11.3.